former Minister of National Security and former Commissioner of Police, Gary Griffith, is with us. Good morning, sir, and welcome to the program.
Hi, good morning.
Well, Mr. Griffith, let me just apologize. I know we were supposed to start at 7 o'clock, but thanks very much for being with us nonetheless. It's very important, given your experience. So thanks for being with us. But Mr. Griffith, as I said, former Minister of National Security, former Commissioner of Police. In that instance, how do you determine that a state of emergency has been successful? In fact, what tools or what resources do you think are necessary for a successful state of emergency given the circumstances?
Well, I think it's rather unfortunate, but it shows the importance of political parties and governments utilizing persons who have expertise in national security. It goes right back to when Patrick Manning said all that is required to lead national security is common sense and a level head. And that is why both major political leaders have gone to the knee-jerk approach of a state of emergency. Kamala Persad cannot criticize this. She did it herself. I may be seen as the third major political leader. I could give the country the assurance that if I was ever to lead Trinidad and Tobago, there was absolutely not a snowball chance in hell that you will call a state of emergency to reduce crime. It's because, again, one is a geologist, one is an attorney, one is trained in law enforcement. They do not understand. A state of emergency is not a crime-fighting tool. It never was. You use a state of emergency if there's a clear and present danger that can cause the destabilizing of a country, a possible terrorist attempt, a planned assassination attempt, an attempted coup, not to reduce crime. And the reason for it is that almost every single thing that is being done now could be done without a state of emergency. And let me just give it to you. There are 6 quick points. One, intensified roadblocks. So they're going to roadblock their way to reduce crime. That's what the state of emergency comes up for in Banana Republic, Trinidad and Tobago with law enforcement. So we're going to be killed with roadblocks all over the country. That could be done without a state of emergency. 2, intensified operations all over the country. That could be done without a state of emergency. And I gave a perfect example. When I was Minister of National Security, I think a soldier was shot in Laventille. And I gave a directive for over 120 soldiers to be stationed in Laventille 24/7. And for 3 months, I think there was 1 murder and there was domestic violence. It's the safest Laventille ever was. That was without a state of emergency. And then obviously bringing in the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force en masse. The role and function of the Defense Force, I know you mentioned me as a security minister and a commissioner of police. My training as a military captain in the Defense Force and being there in the attempted coup, I am fully aware of the role and function of the Defense Force. The Defense Force could do exactly what could be done in a state of emergency in intensified patrols. So the 5,000 of them that have been in Camp Ogden since 1990 waiting for a coup, no prime minister has utilized them properly since 1990. They are there. Their role and function includes an aid to civil power and to support the police and internal security. So rather than just have 50 out of the 5,000 operate to be assigned to the IATF has been ridiculous for the last 34 years. They could and should have been used, and you don't need a state of emergency. So those 3 things could be done without a state of emergency. What we cannot use with a state of emergency would be the concerns. 1, it now can give soldiers powers of arrest. Why? There's no need for it because the soldiers are working in tandem with the police. So the police they are the complementary unit. So the police will be the ones who are trained to understand if that person can and should be arrested. Giving soldiers powers of that authority to arrest or whatever, it can cause serious issues because the soldiers are not trained, precepted. They are not all regimental police. The second has to do with giving you full authority now to break into a home without a warrant. And we would and obviously seizing items belonging to persons without a due process. And the third has to do with actually holding persons indefinitely. That second and third point is what caused the disaster in the 2011 state of emergency. Because by doing these things, breaking into homes without a warrant, seizing items, arresting persons indefinitely, it means that it's based on lack of intelligence by the law enforcement agencies. Because of if you had intelligence, then you could arrest. So what the state of emergency can do now is give you extra powers because of your inability for proper intelligence gathering that can turn to evidence and arrest. And when this happens and you do this and you do not actually get the evidence, these same individuals will come back now. You seized my computer, you broke into my home, you broke my door, you held me indefinitely. The taxpayers are now going to have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. So when I hear these business chambers and these attorneys and these criminologists, the few of them who state that this is beneficial, they don't have a clue. There is no value because what you're going to get is the negative impact of the abuse of authority. My point being is that as someone who I see myself as a patriot and a diplomatic more than a politician, it has already taken place. We must make sure that we don't have a repeat of the disaster of 2011. So there should be a proper national operations center. There should be proper coordination of each and every operation to prevent abuse of authority by police officers or soldiers, and also to make sure that the citizens have immediate access through a hotline and online to report possible abuse of authority and to give information to the law enforcement authorities. If those four things can be achieved, it will minimize the disaster that took place in the 2011 state of emergency.
In that regard, it's very interesting that you mentioned this is not an effective tool used for crime fighting. This should not be a crime fighting initiative. In that regard, do you think that the explanation given yesterday that this is because of intelligence suggesting there are going to be reprisals, given an attempted murder of a individual very much known to the police, is that satisfactory to meet the criteria then for this state of emergency?
No, definitely not. Totally ridiculous. But it is identical. That's why the opposition can't attack the government. Their only attack is they should have done it sooner. So we are saying that if the UNC gets in government, they're going to plaster us with state of emergencies. That is not the way to go, because by doing that, again, people don't, again, these politicians who don't understand sometimes even how national security affects the economy. When you have a state of emergency, let's look at Carnival, for example. Which tourists will want to come to Carnival now knowing our country is under a state of emergency? You could get half of the bookings cancelled. You could get people people who don't want to invest, people feeling uncomfortable. It might increase security costs. It affects business. It will increase the cost of goods and services. It can cause unemployment. It can cause businesses to close. It can cause inflation. All of these things are byproducts that cause crime to also increase. And all of that again shows that we need to be very careful, because, as I mentioned, the same situations that took place of a major concern, as you mentioned, about gang retaliation. What we did, I copied that model from NYPD. If gang A attacks gang B, my next way will be now to protect gang A, because I know the retaliation will take place. And we did a lot of that under the Special Operation Response Team. When we are aware of gang reprisal, we will flood a certain area knowing what is going to happen. You don't call a state of emergency. You have called a state of emergency because of your concern that one gang is going to attack another. That does not make sense. But again, there are things that can be done, which is what we did. And it was done under the recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry into the attempted coup to prevent a repeat of 1990, the formation of a National Operations Center, which I established in 2014 as Security Minister, coordinating all of the different agencies to have proper unification of sharing of information that can be turned into intelligence to have effective operations. That NOC totally collapsed after the change in government. And now there's no sharing of information. One hand doesn't know what the other is doing. If you don't have that in a state of emergency, it's going to collapse. The other thing that you need, that they recommended in that commission, was a national security alert state, which is what we implemented as security minister, which caused the highest reduction in serious crime in 31 years, and as commissioner was the highest reduction in violent crime in 17 years. Those two periods, we did not have that concept of a state of emergency. What we did was an alert state from green to amber to red to black. And as it escalates based on the threat assessment, we can now intensify the operational capabilities, the deployment and so forth of the different agencies. That is what is done. Because if crime continues after the state of emergency, then what? Martial law and the business sector from Shogunas and so forth will foolishly applaud it. You have to be very careful to analyze a situation, and you intensify your strategic operational systems based on the threat assessment. That is not done when you automatically go into a state of emergency. As I said, you can move from green to amber to red to black, and it is minimized when the threat assessment goes down. It escalates when you realize the threat assessment escalates. All of these things they were all implemented and they were shut down. Let me also add Stuart Young's comment when somebody mentioned, can we have state of emergencies and curfews in specific areas? He said that makes no sense because the criminals will just hop from one place to another. Yet again, an example of an attorney with no knowledge, training, or qualification in law enforcement making a very foolish comment. Jamaica has something identical. So what Stuart Young is stating is that Jamaica is stupid. Jamaica has something known as the zone of special operations, where they intensify their operations in a specific area because of the escalation of crime because of gang activity, sharing of drugs, weapons, and so forth. And if it is that it is now controlled, you take out that zone of special operations and you move to another area. So for Stuart Young to say, well, the criminals, if they know that, they will go and commit crime elsewhere. It's not about committing crime. There are specific areas in Trinidad and Tobago that become a hotspot, not just for the activity, but for the organization of the criminal activity, where gangs sit down, they meet, they organize, and prepare. So those are the things that I think that should have been done. To state also that you can't have a curfew in specific areas. I recall in 1995, that's what Patrick Manning did practically. He called a state of emergency, but he put one individual in one house under house arrest. So that was a zone of special operations there. And let me also add, there's no such thing as a limited state of emergency. I keep hearing people say that. I think it was even published in Parliament. It is like saying you're half pregnant. A state of emergency is the whole country is under a state of emergency. But what you can have is a curfew or no curfew. But there's no such thing as a limited state of emergency. There's nothing in the Constitution that has that.
Just to clarify, if you could elaborate, you mentioned something earlier, the NYPD model. If gang B attacks gang A, what we would do is protect gang A. Could you clarify about what you mean protect gang A? That may seem confusing where
Yeah, sure.
gangs
So
have rights for protection.
they do, because I'll tell you why. They will have reprisal, they will have collateral damage. So if there were two major gang leaders, there was one in Sealots and one in Laventille. Both of them have died. And if gang B leaves Laventille and goes into Sealots and they put hits on somebody, or there's drive-by shootings, what you do, the police now, before me, they will just go and guard Sealots. No, what is going to happen next is that Laventille is going to be hit. So you intensify patrols, because you know that when they are going across there, they've got innocent children, persons are going to be killed. You have to maximize that area and lock it off to make the other gang know you can't enter there. Those are all strategic things. It's all tactical. Those things cannot be done unless you have a national operations center. That is what was going to cause proper coordination, patrols, and it cannot be cosmetic. Just put in a vehicle parked up there for the next 3 months. And that's why sometimes when you hear politicians, we need a police post. Every time they pick someone pocket, they want a police post. When you go to New York, when you go to London, you go to Miami, how many police stations do you see? But again, the concept of politicians here, PNM and UNC, is somebody picks your pocket, somebody robs you, set up a police post. The more police stations, the more police posts, the less police officers are out in the streets. That is what Dwayne Gibbs was doing under 21st Century Policing, and Kamala Prasad-Bissessar fired him to bring in Stephen Williams. That is what I was doing as Commissioner of Police, and Kamala Prasad-Bissessar and Keith Rowley agreed to remove me, and they all voted for Earl Christopher. So we see the standard of the major political parties, who they see as Commissioner of Police, and their concept of policing and law enforcement is setting up roadblocks, setting up, building police stations at 10 times the cost, and calling states of emergencies. That is not how you reduce crime. How you reduce crime is effective, hard targeting, utilizing your limited national security resources in an effective and efficient manner, and getting the public to buy in and believe that this is working. That is what happened 3 years ago. Public trust and confidence in the same police officers was 59%. Now it is 8%. All of the state of emergency is not going to reduce that. Increase that public trust and confidence. It may cause it to be affected more, because now you may have rogue officers abusing their authority, arresting people, breaking into homes. What you want is to build public trust. When I build that public trust to 59%, the few moments later with Gary Griffith wasn't because I had ESP, it's because people were calling me on every single thing that was happening in the country I was aware of. I was aware of planned hits on persons, where drugs were going to be, and so that is the type of work that we need. Build the relationship between the police and the citizens. Calling a state of emergency is just going to widen that gap.
Interesting in that you're saying it'll widen that gap. But coming to what again was said yesterday, that when asked, this is not an admittance of our failures in respect to dealing with crime. That's according to Stuart Young. However, is this an admittance that the police operations in Trinidad and Tobago don't necessarily have the resources, or intelligence in Trinidad and Tobago is really poor?
Yes, but it's not because not so much lack of resources. It's square pegs and round holes. Roger Best was the director of the SSA, and I'll give you a perfect example. Do you recall in 2019 to 2021 about kidnappings? We put an end to kidnapping because that same Roger Best, the director of the SSA, who they decided to see as an enemy of the state, Can I, as soon as there was a kidnapping, when you hear a commissioner of police and a director of the SSA not sleeping for 2 days, working through all the technology and the systems and the programs, and sometimes you see it in these television shows where you have the maps and the charts and we laying it out. And then we were able to solve 12 kidnappings consecutively, starting with Natalie Polony. Break down doors with a warrant, by the way, and arrest the kidnappers and free the victim. That never happened before. It never happened before 2018. It never happened after 2021. What happens now is persons escape, and then you have the Deputy Commissioner of Police Operations boasting that the police rescued the individual. The man escaped and went to a police station, and they said that they assisted. We put an end to kidnapping because of that type of qualification from Roger Best as the director of the SSA. 12 kidnappings where all the kidnappers were held. That is what put an end to kidnapping. That's what put an end to home invasion. That is what put an end to extortion. And all of these things were done without the need for a state of emergency. So it shows that if you put the right people in the right positions, you can get effective results. So it's not a lack of resources. The technology, the tools, the equipment we had then put an end to kidnapping. Why is it recommends? Because of the hierarchy do not understand how to synergize and utilize the technology and the resources that we have. But Kamala Prasad Bisasa and Keith Rowley voted for Willa Christopher. Regardless of what they say, that will never change.
In that sense as well. So just to clarify, we do have the technology here in Trinidad and Tobago. We do have what is needed.
We do. We have the technology. We have the training. We have the capability. And our special branch officers, they go abroad and they top these courses. We have the people that are available. When that special operation response team with just 100 walked through Port of Spain, people felt safe. They walked through any area. They felt safe. That was replaced thanks to old McDonald Jacob and Willa Christopher. And they replaced the special operation response team that put an end to kidnapping, home invasion, and extortion, and pegged back criminals. Every single gang member feared the special operation response team. There were 43 death threats on myself. And you change that with a national operation task force. 3 years now, their biggest achievement has been to arrest an old lady for selling school books on the pavement. That is the difference. You could give these individuals the opportunity to go out there and take the fight to the criminals, which is why I applaud the Prime Minister by stating we need the criminals to feel uncomfortable. That is what I did. But then when I said one shot, one kill, people were upset. When I said you touch one, you touch all, people were upset. For my 3 years, thankfully, not one police officer was killed in the line of duty. Now they're taking pot shots at them because there's no fear of reprisal. We need to make sure we do it to them before they do it to us within the law. People need to understand, and there will be people who do not like what I say because many of them benefit from crime. They're family related, affiliated with criminals. And I could go back to that same point. When I refer to a man who murders somebody as a cockroach, people get offended. When I say a man rapes a 12-year-old child, I call him a cockroach, you're upset. When I say that you kidnap someone and you're upset if I call him a cockroach, that is what you are. And if you have what I was putting was to build up the hatred we have in this country is yellow versus red, PNM versus UNC. The hatred and the bitterness is supposed to be good versus evil, law-abiding citizens versus criminal. That is what the war is. I will never see any political opponent as my enemy because I have been trained in the military, I've been trained in arts of war, I've been trained in combat, but I'm also trained to unite a country and unite people. What we are doing now is the politicians are doing just the opposite. They've never held a water gun, but they're dividing the country. And back at the ranch, the true enemy, the criminal elements, are the ones that are smiling all the way to the bank.
In that case, Mr. Griffith, I know you mentioned that you're not necessarily in favor of this state of emergency. You don't think it's an effective crime fighting tool. You've stated the reasons why. At this point, though, what do you think Trinidad and Tobago needs? I mean, a record number of murders in 1 year. People are living in fear. I mean, what is it that we need at this point, less a state of emergency?
Well, as we have the state of emergency, instead of political parties opposed to the government getting on like crybabies and just criticizing the state of emergency, it has happened. So we have now made our statement in the first 24 hours. What we need to do now is to solidify behind the state to make sure that the state of emergency can be successful, not spending every day crying and criticizing the state of emergency. So what should be done is proper systems to prevent the disaster that took place in 2011. So as I said, one, there should be a hotline on online reporting for every citizen. Immediately, if there's any abuse of authority, immediately they can contact that hotline to make sure that there's no abuse of authority by the law enforcement agencies, which is what happens in a state of emergency. 2, similar hotlines are online that could give information to the law enforcement agencies to target specific places so they just won't make wild random hits. 3, making sure that there's a proper strategic national operations center to solidify our intelligence gathering by having intelligence units from the Army, Customs, Coast Guard, prisons, police, all work together. I built it. It is there at Knowsley. It is not being used. We need to maximize it, man it, and utilize it, and then be able to utilize that for point number 4, which is to make sure that every single operation must be registered. It must be noted. You are aware of who the individual is. So if at any time there's any abuse of authority, we can pinpoint and target the perpetrator and the person who led that operation. We cannot and must not have any law enforcement agency or person utilizing this state of emergency for wild, random, personalized vendettas against citizens. In other words, I am a police officer and I realize this fellow was with my girlfriend. Now I am going to kick down his door under a state of emergency that gives me the power to just break down his door. Every single operation must be registered and approved through that National Operations Center. If these things were done, we would not have what took place in 2011. So we do these things and then we utilize the information, because what Stuart Young and them are really asking for is that they want to get intelligence. Because of their lack of it, they are trying to get extra authority to break into doors, seize computers, arrest people. But if you do that, it must build an intelligence database so that after the state of emergency, that intelligence can be turned to evidence to arrest. Because if we do not do that, we are going to yet again have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in damages for false arrest, false imprisonment, items being seized, doors being broken into, and that is the last thing we want. I am hoping that the SOE can be of value to assist the country in crime reduction at this time.
Following that point, just following off of that point, do you think, well, one, do you think that the government had no other choice but to call a state of emergency? And given your explanation about building an intelligence base, what would you say would be success following the state of emergency, or even during the state of emergency?
Yeah, sure. One, the re-establishment of that National Operations Center. It is what played a major part towards the highest reduction in serious crime in 31 years. You know, I keep hearing the UNC boast about they did a release, which was very comical. They said they are the party that can reduce crime. But all the things that the UNC would have done and achieved would have been, as when I was Minister of National Security, the damning vessels, the NOC, the Community Comfort Patrol, the Rapid Response Unit, the National Security Special Operation Group. Those are the things that can and should be done, the reigniting of things that would have been achieved in 2013 to 2015. And what I think now is that if it is that we can just re-energize the items, then there's no need for a state of emergency. As I mentioned again, the National Security Alert State takes away the need for a state of emergency. You want to lift it. When I hear people, the media says we want to beef up security. It's not an abattoir. What is beefing up security? It must have a level that when it moves from green to amber, it means that all security forces know that all vehicles entering camps must be searched. If it moves from amber to red, everybody comes off leave. And everybody, you move your weapon from safety to lock and load. So there's a proper template for every single person that understands. If it moves to black, even the citizens in the country know that if you see somebody throw something in a dustbin in a mall or something, you have to watch and see if it's an improvised explosive device. The country becomes aware of the National Alert State. They work together. And this is done to minimize terrorism, anybody who may be the enemy of the state, and major criminal activity. That National Alert State I drafted in 2014, it was utilized properly. It worked in Laventille, as I said. I pumped 120 soldiers in there, and not a dog bark. Dogs in Laventille stopped barking because soldiers were up and down in Laventille. And there was no state of emergency. It was a National Security Alert State. That is what is required. Those are the things that are required. There may be a consideration for, similar to Jamaica's zone of special operations, where we can target specific areas rather than put in a hard state of emergency. It sends a stigma internationally. It affects our economy. It affects our image. And if it is that we can do things such as a zone of special operations, a national security alert state, having a national operations center to get proper intelligence, so you don't need to call a state of emergency to seize computers, because now you have the intelligence required. If you get these things, there's no need for a state of emergency. Until then, however, based on those 4 recommendations I made, I hope that the state of emergency can be effective. Every citizen, law-abiding, should hope that the state of emergency can be effective.
Mr. Griffith, thank you very much for joining us on the program this morning. Thanks for your time. And, as I said, former Minister of National Security, former Commissioner of Police, but you also pointed out training in respect to the military and service, given what happened in 1990 as well. So thank you very much for your time this morning, sir, and all the very best. We'll keep an eye on the situation.
Yes.